my bed when I was a little guy. And I went up into the attic and he was up there drawing Daredevil number 12. And that was it, I was hooked. And when he told me that Daredevil was blind and a superhero, top of my head exploded. Yeah, we have, sorry, we advanced of you, we have some questions. Yes, sir, in the back. No, you, yes.
You've been at the top of this industry since I was a kid.
Since he was a baby, yeah.
And what I wanted to ask is, when I was a child, comics were something we didn't even tell people we read because we get,
Yeah, I remember those days.
In the locker room, that was the biggest thing in the world. I was wondering, from your perspective, how much has it changed being a part of,
That's a good question.
small to
Okay, give it a shot.
One
That's a
of
great
the
question.
weirdest things for me, a few years ago, I went to a museum exhibit about comic book artists. And it's like, who would have thunk when we were, like, when I was a kid, same thing, you kind of hid the fact that you read comics. It was this really nerdy, obscure thing to do. And now I do library talks all the time. So the libraries are really supporting it because they realize it actually lets kids read, So the fact that we've got that kind of public acknowledgement for our work, and it's all based on what we do, is the books. And it's almost mind-blowing. I could not have conceived of that 30 years ago.
Hey, I'll give you a microcosm. When I first got out of college, I went to advertising illustration school. And I started to work for Marvel. If I got asked what I was doing, I told them. They said, "Oh, you're a comic book artist. You're a cartoonist." It was a derisive "Oh, you're a cartoonist." Now, if I go to a cocktail party and they ask what I do for a living, I say I'm a comic book artist. "Oh, you're an artist." And nothing nasty in both directions, but it's changed so dramatically. We came up alongside Hollywood, and Hollywood needs us now.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when I actually went to art college, none of my teachers respected comics at all. And it turned out, when I went to school with George Pratt, Kent Williams, Mark Torello, John Van Fleet. A whole bunch of us became professional comic book artists, but we kind of transformed the teachers over those 4 years. But now you go in, everybody's wanting to just study comics, And so everything I learned, I had to learn on the job from people like this guy about storytelling because they never taught me in school.
It's really interesting that you mentioned working in the lab, talks in the libraries, because when my son hit first grade,
Yep.
he was really struggling, and the first thing
Joey.
I did was give him a Lee Kirby Fantastic Four.
It really works. It's
Our middle
absolutely
son-
proven to work.
Our middle
yeah.
son struggled with that, and comics, she put a comic book in front of him, and the association with the visual and the words, and he's thrived over the course of his life because of that connection with words and pictures.
Yeah.
No mystery, but I had a decent vocabulary in high school because I read comic books.
They had
Stan
a
Lee-
college level vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly. Stan said, "I'm not going to write down to children. I want them to read up to what I'm writing." And he was right, because he was speaking to everybody as if they were adults, even little kids. It's great. So this man gets paid very well to be a moderator. So
I am not Howard Mackey. Just wanted to get that out there. Howard couldn't
Howard
be here.
apologizes for not making it. He's very ill.
I'm Terence Dollard. I host a show for PBS called Comic Culture. Obviously, you know the great John Romita Jr. and the great Scott Hanna. So thanks for coming. And I could probably ask some questions, but why don't we just go ahead and get some more questions from the audience, because you've gotten everybody started pretty good.
Anybody.
See,
If you don't have any questions.
now it dies.
All right.
Actually, I can ask questions. I have a question. Speaking about Hollywood and comics, has anybody felt that they damaged the brands of some characters by doing them differently in the films, or has it been an improvement over? All right.
There have been some characters that absolutely on the screen, they're so much better, and you can see even some of the things with Daredevil that you were just describing, you get more of a sense of that character. But then you get some of these characters that flop, and when they don't interpret them properly, you, like on
You take offense to it. Sure.
Catwoman, Halle Berry,
Right, yeah.
But there have been so many people who tried putting Catwoman on the screen, giving her a solo story, and it doesn't work yet.
So it's not all the time, but it is hit or miss. I tend to agree with you on that. Okay. Thank you for that.
Holly was a pretty cat woman, though.
Oh yeah, yeah,
She's a pretty anything.
yeah.
So, Brian in the back?
I loved everything you did on Kick-Ass, but I have to say that the movies were great.
Thank you very much. Oh, I got a funny story. They asked for a barista, who I thought was a lawyer in London. I didn't realize it was not a barrister, a barista. So they said, "Would you like to be the barista in the film?" Yeah, sure. So I did it, and I did my little bit. I even said sure, and I turned, and they cut me out of the final version. As God is my witness, the director said, "You don't look authentic enough." A New York City barista, and I was the only guy from New York on the set, and I wasn't authentic enough. It's a true story. Kathy was with me.
That's Hollywood.
Then there's a character in the film. I forgot what the part was, but his name was Tony Romita. He was a guy that got injured or killed by somebody. He originally was supposed to be Johnny Romita, and the director said, "No, that name isn't authentic enough." Old true story. But my oldest son Tony got his name.
That's funny.
Well,
The youngest son got in the film.
that's true. My son Vinny was in it, going through the comics in the opening scene. That's true. And I have another funny story about that. I'm sorry, but I can't stop. She loves this story. The producer of the film, a very elite guy from London, thought that I was actually connected.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And the director, Matthew Vaughn, came up to me and said, "Listen, he's really nervous being around you." It's why? He says, "Well, he thinks you're a mob guy." I said, "Why? Because I'm Italian?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah, he's not a smart guy." Then I didn't even really get that angry, although she got a little bit insulted, my wife. He said, "No, don't correct him. You'll get more done if he's afraid of you."
Right. Yeah.
It's a true
But they
story.
still cut you out of the film.
That's
Yeah.
true. They cut me out of the film. I should have had his car rewired. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Yes.
I'm curious, and I think it could be a question for both of you guys, is like, you've been working for such a long time, and your approach to the way that you construct your figures has changed over time, or the way that you render the marks that you make, and I imagine for you, it's more about who you're inking, right?
Well, the styles, even in inking, have changed drastically over the past 35 years. Yeah.
I guess my question is, can you speak to maybe like two or so of the kind of milestone kind of shifts in your approach to how you work, and like what motivates those big shifts in your approach?
Go right ahead. And by the way, the man is an artist who happens to use ink. The man's a brilliant artist. He's not just an inker.
For me, because I normally work in several styles at once, I've purposely avoided, one of the biggest shifts in the industry came when Image started, right? They broke off and everybody wanted to look like Jim Lee, Silvestri, and they really were influenced, especially on the inking side, by Scott Williams. And I made a conscious decision, even though I can do that style, I didn't want to be another Scott Williams. I wanted to be my own self. So my philosophy has always been, I want to adapt to my partner, my penciler. So every partner I work differently with. If I'm working Mark Bagley, I ink him differently than when I work with John. And literally that still happens to this day. So for me, there's no abrupt shift. It's a gradual shift. I also love working with new pencilers who are coming in, the young kids. So I'm seeing what they're influenced by, what their styles are, and I can't help it. I'm influenced by the people I work with. So I'm constantly at school and learning the new things. One of the big dangers in comics is it's hard to have longevity because styles do change, and if you don't keep up with those changes of style, or if, I think John actually makes those changes in style. He's one of those guys that I love working with him because nobody else there are no bad Romita copies out there because he's John. There's only one Romita Jr., and it's so cool to be able to.
Romita, it's John.
But it's very difficult to set up a style that's your own. And that's one of the best ways, in my opinion, to withstand the test of time. Because now, despite that, even in the time I've worked with him, with his probably about 28 years total, his style has changed drastically in those 28 years. And I try to adapt with those changes of style. So we don't look the same now as we did 20 years ago when we were in Spider-Man. We're always growing, improving. The technology changes, so that makes a big difference in how we perceive things. Storytelling changes because of movies and all that other stuff. So
I've never had the ability to change my style. I say that with all due reverence to everybody else. I can't consciously have a style because I'm too busy trying to get it
tell
done.
the story, yeah.
Try to tell the story. And I called it, and I jokingly called it deadline style way back in the day, because we were working for a small amount of money when we first started. Whatever we got done on time, you get a bonus for being on time. So I was only conscious of getting it done. Sunday night, no sleep. Monday night, no sleep. Get it done and you get paid. And whatever happened, and over the course of 40 years, you improve. You have to. You do something every day for 12 hours. You have to improve.
Yep.
If you're full of yourself and you think, I don't need to improve, then you're going to suck in a couple of months. It's the truth. And without those precise words, that's what my father told me. If you think you're great, then you're going to eventually suck.
Yeah, if I'm a teacher on the side, and I teach all my students, if you are content with where you are, everybody else on the planet is going to be passing you, because they're going to keep on growing and learning and expanding. You're going to just sit still. And even if you're not declining, you're still, in comparison, absolutely declining.
Yeah, the good thing about coming into the industry with guys that were better than me was I had to work harder to get that good. And it made me a better artist. Now, storytelling made my art better, but it wasn't necessarily better art. Just the storytelling was good. And to do scenes that other guys would pass up for the chance to do a pinup. The conversations I had with my father is watch this movie and you'll know what to do with storytelling. It was a movie called The Big Country with Charlton Heston and Gregory Peck. Yeah. Now, the movie was great, fine, but he said there's a couple of scenes in this that you want to throw in. And there's a fight between Gregory Peck and Charlton Heston, and they pull back to show the size of the movie screen. Two little tiny figures beating the crap out of each other, and you hear the thuds, but you saw this great vista. He says, now think about that. Instead of showing the obligatory close-up fight scene, he says, pull back a little bit, have fun. And he was right, 100% correct. And the movies I watched with him, my brother and I, when there was, rainy weekend, there was nothing to do outside, all the great movies, On the Water, these great classics, On the Waterfront, were storytelling films.
Absolutely, yeah.
12 Angry Men, anything to do with storytelling, and it really did help. And he'd say,
12 Angry Men is one of those in a confined space for the entire film.
Exactly right.
And we get that in scripts all the time. It's like, wait, how do you make this interesting when it's
Exactly right.
just a small room
Exactly
and
right.
not a lot of stuff to do? How do
go.
you still make it interesting? So it's tough.
thank you, great conversation, great questions. Yes, sir.
Follow-up part question. I mean, artist development is never a straight line, right? I tend to think of it as like stair steps. Like you find something in your work that like is really different than what you did before. It's some kind of an improvement. You get excited about it. You ride that line, then you hit a wall. You bounce up against that wall. Then you hit some new improvement in your thing. It's a moment of discovery for you. So clearly you have long.
No, that's a good way of putting it. It's a very good way of putting it.
And I'm just wondering, are there moments in your artwork where obviously you have the famous deadline style, just as a fan of yours from when I first started in the early 80s, I could see you change, and I was never quite sure if it was as a reaction to the spirit of the times, some other artists, but clearly you're saying you're just producing the work, so I'm just wondering, as you're working, can you remember back that I hit this one moment where flashlight goes off, and now I'm either faster or I'm more accurate. I know storytelling is the biggest thing that you're always going to come back to, but as an artist, as your growth, can look back and maybe see a few things that were really inspirational to you, so us as artists can maybe like.
Yeah, there was a seminal moment when I met Jack Kirby and John Buscema for the first time meeting them, and I asked, I forgot how we segued into this, but both of them asked me how many pages I get done per day, which is comical. I think Kirby was doing 7 a day at that
Oh,
time.
yeah, it's insane.
And he had this big cigar in his mouth. He says, "How many pages you do in a day?" I said, "I don't know, 1." And I thought that was a proud moment. And he takes that and he goes, "Throw away your effing eraser." And you know what he said. And John Buscema said something similar to that a couple of months later. He says, "Yeah, you don't need your eraser. Whatever you put down the first." Now that helped me get faster. But again, it was not a conscious effort to do anything except be on time. But it did make me a better artist because I had to learn how to do things better so that I wouldn't get dragged down by them. How to draw cars, how to draw buildings at a certain direction. Even to draw women at first, which was a struggle. The human figure was a struggle at first, but as you get better and better at it, you get faster and faster at it. I drew, because of Kirby, I was told to draw 3-dimensional characters. I made everything blocky. And for a short amount of time, too long a time, I made characters overly blocky until I got slapped around by my wife, and she said, "Don't make them blocky anymore."
So if I could ask a quick question as a follow-up. When you're working on a character and you sort of get into their personality, you have that acting come through on the page, how does that work with you and your storytelling?
The dialogue that the writer will drop into a plot, which is not always a plot, it can be a script, but the dialogue generally is helpful in that you know what their faces should look like while they're saying those lines. But everybody's a little bit of a ham in this business, in that you could use your own face. So I have a mirror, and ask ours, I've got a mirror next to my desk. If I have an expression, I'll be in the mirror. But you have to be a little bit of an actor.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to.
Animators do the same thing.
And a
Yeah,
guy who
right.
knows this is him because he'll see what I'm doing, or if I'm not doing it correctly, he'll correct it. But you do have to have expressions, and you have to make it look like they're acting those words out. You have no choice.
And it's amazing how very subtle marks can make a gigantic difference in an expression, or, you know, the difference between a wry grin and a frown is just like a tiny little bit of pressure on the pencil. So, and that's why I usually want to read the script so I know what John also gives me great notes on the side of all the pages so I know what's going on. So between the script and his notes and his drawing, I'm on the same page with everybody else. I know how to emphasize or de-emphasize certain things, certain marks to make it work. So one of the reasons I love working with John is, and this goes back to what somebody else was about change of style, that John is kind of what I call old school penciler, in that a lot of the modern kids want to do like every single mark and like scritch and stuff and say, trace this. And I'm like, what do you need me for? I'm not participating in the project. John learned from the old school guys like his father and Kirby and Buscema that you give the inker all the meat, all the storytelling, all the structure, and then let them participate, let them be a partner in the process. And so you can very clearly tell when Klaus inks John as opposed to me inking John, as opposed to Al Williamson inking John, they look different. It doesn't mean John's doing a different style, it's he's allowing his partner to influence it in a certain direction. My goal is to always make it look as close to John and not as much like me, but it inevitably still looks like us, because that's the way it works.
How about in the back?
You mentioned earlier that you didn't get paid very much when you were first working, and you also mentioned Jack Kirby, and we think to know Jack Kirby is notorious for not getting treated the best.
It's true.
And do you think as times have changed and as comics and movies have become more popular, that artists and writers are being treated better?
Writers, probably. Artists, I don't know, because invariably, if I tell people that I work on a comic book, they'll say, "Oh, so you're a writer."
Right.
They assume, and that's fine. There's nothing you can do about that. But we are not looked at as creators as much as writers are, and that's too bad.
Absolutely, yeah. And unfortunately, like beginning artists, like new kids coming into even Marvel and DC, get paid a pittance still to this day. So there are compensations like doing conventions and things like that, but as far as I don't even want to describe how little my page rate has increased over the past 30 years. You know, it has certainly not kept up with inflation, let's put it that way.
But artists are not known as creators, we're just artists. Writers are creators, even when we come
Which
up
is,
with the
yeah,
ideas.
and it's not true, but that's how it's generally perceived.
Yeah, after, creating art for so long, do you ever feel there's a danger, or do you ever feel like, man, am I copying myself, or am I doing this?
That's a great
Yeah.
question. I make a concerted effort not to draw something I've done or drawn before, figure, anything. And with Spider-Man, unfortunately, it's a limited amount. And I know he's probably chuckled and said, oh, I've done this before, and there's figures, even she will say, that looks familiar to me. You can't help it. It's really hard.
It's actually an automatic human thing to repeat yourself, and we actually have to work hard to try to avoid that.
Try to do something different. Here's the worst part. Everything we do is derivative of the guys that were better than us before us. Nothing you can do about it. Now, Kirby was treated poorly because of his style, which wasn't anatomically correct. But as he got more into people's minds as the great man that did these powerful images, suddenly he's a great artist. But when I was a kid, he was treated like dirt
Yeah.
because of his insane style. And it's like a movie that comes out, it does poorly at the box office, becomes a classic. I don't know, Scarface was a piss poor box office movie. And that's considered one of the greatest movies of all time, even though Al Pacino overacted his ass off in the movie. It's the same thing with comics. It really is, same thing with creators. Over time, you suddenly, wow, you were great. No, I wasn't, you hated my guts. I had a guy come up to me and say, listen, I don't like your stuff, but could you sign my book, please?
Well, if I could ask a quick follow-up here. When you get feedback from your wife, or you get feedback from Scott or your other artistic partners, how do you kind of, make sure that you're following the good advice and not somebody who might be thinking, I'm going to stick a knife in your back and take your place?
I can only do things as best in my mind and on the page that I can. And if I think about what everybody else is doing, or can I be like that guy, then my stuff would look like John Romita Sr., and it doesn't.
Right, yeah.
It starts off looking like Romita Sr., Kirby, and Buscema, and by the time it comes, oh shit, it's me. And I can't help but be that way. I'm my own worst enemy. But that's the best way to get better, as far as I'm concerned. I'm trying to justify the way I am angry at myself if I don't get it right the very first time. She even says, throw away your eraser. That's great, leave it alone.
Yes.
And I'll rip
Right.
up a page. And she throws sharp objects at me. She says, don't do that anymore.
Well, for instance,
All right,
actually,
not sharp objects.
for Amazing Spider-Man #1, John did this really killer splash page, which is the first splash page in the book with Spider-Man in costume. And the editor said, John, it looks gorgeous. And it literally was like my favorite page in the whole book. And they said, we're not going to use it. And
They
and
wanted
then
something more for the first issue and the first shot of Spider-Man to be
Right.
more commercially viable. I kid you not.
And it made sense in the editorial sense, in the marketing sense, as it were. So John literally redrew the entire splash, and then this time it wasn't the editor. John was like, no, I want to redo it. So then he did it a third time, which is the version that finally got printed. And now they actually are using the second version as
variant
the
cover?
variant. No, not the primary cover for the second printing.
Okay.
So it was still good enough to be a cover, but John turned it down. He said it wasn't good enough. So we're always our own worst enemies in a sense, but that's a good thing because that's how we keep on our toes. That's how we keep paying attention and get better.
I never threw away my eraser.
Now, you had a question.
Yeah. You guys have been working together for a really long time. What's the most important thing you guys have learned from each other over the years?
The most important thing I've learned is that there's 2 artists on a book. 3 with the color artist. And
Oh,
I've never
absolutely,
thought of it
yeah.
any other way
Yeah.
than that. Because I know what kind of artist he is, that he makes a living as an ink artist, but I know what he is as an artist, and it's great. And the color artists are the same way, and it's 3 guys on 1 book, as far as I'm concerned. The writer, yeah, he's all right too. I'm sorry, Zeb, if you get this on any film, oh shit, I'm sorry.
And for me, I've worked with dozens and dozens of different artists in my career, and working with John is so special because of exactly what he just said, that he treats it as a partnership, as a team effort, and my analogy is it's like, music that, one person can write and play all the instruments and sing and stuff like that, but usually the best end product is when you've got the best guitarist, the best drummer, the best lead singer, all work collaborating together, they come up with this magic. And if you go in thinking that way, you're all lifting each other up. And that end product is this magical thing that I can pencil, but when I work with John, something else magical comes out. When we get the right colors on the book, that I was very curious when we were. If you haven't read Amazing Spider-Man, the new Amazing Spider-Man, I don't want to ruin anything, but Tombstone's the major bad guy in the first arc. And he's supposed to be an albino, but I was encouraging John. John was doing all this great rendering on the face. I'm like, John, this is gorgeous. Keep doing it. Keep giving me all this stuff. It's just gorgeous. He was doing all these great planes and modeling but he's an albino. And I'm putting black lines all over the face, right? And what happened was the colorist kept all those lines, but he knocked them back a bit. So they're no longer black lines, they're brown lines or blue lines or whatever.
He gets blown up, and we just scarred his face up,
Right.
and I got carried away, and
No, you didn't. It was great. I loved it. I actually encouraged
great
him. I
character.
said,
It's a
keep
great
doing
character.
this.
Yeah, it's a great character.
But it was really all three of us together to get to what you see on the final page, working, in conjunction with each other. You're not fighting each. And when you get the right team, it just flows, and it's fun. It's enjoyable. And, hopefully he knows he can trust me when he hands off a page to me. And I know I'm going to get good storytelling and great structure and great textures and all that stuff I need from John. And so it just makes it a joy to do our job.
Now, listen, in fairness to everybody I've worked with, I never felt that I was working with somebody that was just tracing over what I was doing. The old bugaboo is that inkers, they just, it's for reproduction purposes. I worked with guys like Al Williamson and John Romita Sr., and from that feeling on, I've been working with some of the great ink artists, and I never felt anybody was tracing. Although Al Williamson once said, "Shut up, I'm just tracing your stuff."
Oh, God.
But that's the way Al
Yeah,
Williamson,
right,
he's
yeah.
a self-deprecating genius.
Right.
But I've never felt that way, and I've always felt that there's been a good camaraderie because there'll be bad figures, bad panels, and he just calmly goes about fixing it. That's wonderful, and that's what you're supposed to have is a partnership. And we have Marcio, what's his last name?
Menez.
Marcio is the colorist.
Menez.
Menez. Just is brilliant stuff,
Yeah.
and that's why this book looks as good as it does. It's three of us, and Zeb Wells is a brilliant writer as well.
Yeah.
He just can't draw. Yes, I'm sorry, you asked.
No, that's okay.
Years ago, here, one of the best panel discussions I ever saw was with Jim Shooter, and he went through an old Fantastic Four book, and he broke down scene by scene what you guys do as far as as artists, when you get the script and I know that's not what's called, but when you begin creating the story, your role in the storytelling, my question to you guys is, what are some of your most triumphant moments as visual storytellers, right? Like if you can think back of all the stuff you've done, what were you thought, man, I really nailed it. I, as an artist, told this story perfectly.
If I had to choose one,
Where's Kenny?
I was going to say
That's
9/11.
what I would have said, yeah.
That was, somebody asked me this Friday, what, do you remember everything you're doing when you're doing, after you've seen it in print? And most times, if I open a book up and I look at a panel, I think I was in this place and I was doing this. It's that connection, visual and memory. The 9/11 issue, I look at a page, I don't remember what I was doing, what I was thinking, I just don't. That's the kind of thing, it just wipes out that kind of happy memory, because comics to me were happy memory. You see what you're doing. The two of us, I don't know if it was a blur. There's nothing you could do about it. That we were attacked and we had to draw that. And at first I said, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to capitalize on this horrific event. And then Marvel said to me, listen, we're not doing it that way. We're going to donate this, this, and this is going to be for this purpose. And the two of us, I think we probably aged a couple of years doing that in our business. And yet we met the firefighters in Las Vegas at a signing that drove cross country in the middle of the night. And they came to our signing thinking that we were something special. These guys hooked up with the San Diego firefighters San Diego guys came through Vegas, picked up a crew, and these 2 sets of heroes drove all night to the pit. And then they come to our signing and they act like we did something
Yeah,
special.
right, exactly, yeah.
So we vowed to remark every one of those.
All crying.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the silent issue, right?
No, this was the black issue, we
Yeah, the
call
black
it,
cover.
the Amazing
But if we
Spider-Man
had to choose,
36.
if I had to choose a triumphant storytelling, it was that one. And Straczynski was genius, and we did probably our
Yeah,
best work.
we poured our heart and souls into that single issue. And I think, somebody asked me today how long it took us to produce it, and I think we actually had a pretty tight
We had a pretty good pace,
deadline.
yeah. They had a deadline that they needed to buy, which was unnecessarily true. I don't know how to put it, they shouldn't have done that to us, but we had to get it done, we got it done. Thank you for that question. Sorry, I got a little bit carried away. But that means a lot to us, and that if anybody has a black issue that doesn't come to us, we remark it because we love doing it.
Yeah,
And we're gonna get every single effing one of them. We
They
vowed
still
to do
keep
that.
coming up with blank
Does
ones. I don't
does
know how
anybody
they
know
do
if they
it.
have a second printing on that issue?
There is, yeah, there are multiple printings.
Because you know why?
but,
Because
yeah.
we said we wanted to get every single cover, and they did it on purpose. They reprinted it. We're gonna get it. We're gonna get it. I don't care how long it takes.
So, you talked obviously about the artistic side of it. Have you, what kind of experience do you have or recommendations for, the writing side to be able to avoid some of those pages where you're looking at the script going, I don't know how on earth I'm gonna draw all of that. Do you ever send pages back, or do you ever have certain artists or writers that you're like, and I'm not gonna be working with you again. Thank you very much. It was a great professional.
No, and all of the above, because if you do that, then you will, whatever reputation you have at that point will be diva-esque. And then that's not gonna happen. We've done it long enough, and we revere the guys that we watched when we were younger, and they were professionals, so we should do the same thing. You do what you can and do the best you can. We joke, I call them up and I say, you believe what this guy's asking us to do? And we're supposed to keep our mouths shut, but when we do it, the scene makes sense. A battle scene between the Avengers and the X-Men at December 31st at 11:59 on Times Square, with every car and every person in Manhattan in that scene, I'll curse that person's grandparents. But when it's done, it's the right thing to do.
But at the same time, I've seen John move panels. One of the big things he had to teach Straczynski, I believe, is Straczynski was used to writing for movies and film, but we have this thing called a page turn in comics that you want to actually have the reveal on the next page, not on the first
That's a
page
good
kind of
example.
thing.
Yeah.
And the writer was a very good visual storyteller, excellent writer, but he didn't know that pacing that is specific to this medium. So John would, frequently have to adjust those things. And you'd get permission from the editor sometimes or whatever, I don't know if you did or not.
Along these lines, there's another thing that it drives me bananas. The writer will write the dialogue, stream of consciousness sometimes, without the consideration that
Who's on the left, who's on the right?
who's on
Yes.
the left, center, and right. So the dialogue then we have to draw to match the order of this. And it sometimes, you're all over the place. And guys back in the day would have balloons with the crossing of,
Or
that
over
always
somebody's face or whatever. Yeah,
and that
right.
drove me crazy. So he knows I've cursed it because you have to adjust it. So the whole page and the scene gets massaged because everybody has to speak, unless you're in Japan or Israel. You have to make sure it's left to right, and that's a bugaboo that drives me bananas.
When I teach visual storytelling, I always say that we read from left to right, so you have to have that flow. But there's also a certain rule of you're not the 180-degree rule that you're not supposed to totally reverse the camera. But sometimes, according to the dialogue, we have to reverse the camera. There's no choice because that's the way the order it's written in, and we don't want the guy way on the right speaking with the word balloon way on the left.
And the last bit about this came from my father. In that instance, when it looks like you're going to have to throw everybody into this, graduate it with a change of the figure's position. In other words,
Right,
if you start off with the back of the guy's head, instead of just going to the front of his face, in front of him visually, turn it to profile first. Add the panel. and then it looks like you suddenly are moving.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, because the sense of movement adjusts for it like a moving camera.
Exactly
and it
right.
makes it
And
work,
you,
yeah.
then the artist, excuse me, the writer will see that and throw one of the balloons into that middle panel. So we add a panel to that.
I have learned so much brilliant stuff about storytelling from working with this guy, yeah.
All right. Anyone else have a question?
Next.
Nope, right back there.
You talked earlier about characters that did not translate well over to movies or other media. What kind of art, your art specifically, have you seen that has translated well or inspired other
The Daredevil series. That was, I got a call from the director saying, we're taking this because of what he did in this run. He spoke to Frank. It was Man Without Fear. That was the most flattered I ever was and loved every second of it.
Didn't get a penny from it.
Didn't get a penny.
Typical.
My wife,
yes,
Kathy
right,
Romita,
yes,
ladies
right.
and gentlemen, she knows. But my name was at the time. Oh, there it is. That and The Punisher. I was very, very flattered at all of that. Thank you for asking that question. That's a good question.
But isn't art its own reward? We have a question over there?
Thank you for that.
I imagine that, you know, for a certain period of your career, everything that comes to you, you do what you're given, right? You pair it with a writer, or you translate the script, whatever. At some point, I imagine, you start to pick your projects, and you pick the people that you're working with, and I'm curious to know about a time where you were particularly excited to say, like, oh man, here's what I'd like to draw, here's what a type of story I'd like to do, and like, did you have that thought first and then kind of approach a writer saying, you're the person that I think writes this type of thing, this is what I want to do?
I've done that, but I've never thrown a hissy fit with any editor and said, I have to have this person. I've never been able to do that. If my father doesn't have an ego, I can't have one either.
Yeah, considering his status in the industry, he could, you know, power through a lot of stuff, and he's very easygoing about that stuff.
However, at a bar after a convention, by the way, the greatest ringtone of all time.
I don't think they came to the panel, but let's-
Roadhouse Blues by the Doors, just so you know. Sorry. I've never, at a bar, after a convention, you sit down with a writer and say, I want to work with you, and let the writer go and do the dirty
right,
work.
yeah.
I'm literally saying that. I said it to Chris Claremont. I said, we got to do something. Go talk to an editor.
Yeah, I've actually even, Chris Claremont came up to me one time and said, Scott, who would you like to work with? And like what? So he started feeling me out, and then he actually created for us the team that I wanted and the characters that we had a blast with it. But that actually came from Claremont doing all the work, not from me doing all the work. Inkers don't have that much. Normally, I take what they give me. So, since I'm such a workaholic, most of my career I've done, like, normally I do like 3 different books every month or more. And that's why I work for actually Marvel and DC, because neither company keeps me busy enough for me. So I'm just like, I need some work, but what do you got? And sometimes those unusual things that you don't expect turn out to be really fun projects. So basically if they call me on Spider-Man or Batman, I'm there, but they'll throw out Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's like, wait, a raccoon and a talking tree, come on. But it turns into a really fun thing, and sometimes the good writers get started on really obscure titles. And those turn it, so like I started on Doom Patrol with Grant Morrison and Richard Case, that turned into a TV series. I never would have thought that would happen, but it happened, so.
To end this part of that, because this is a great segue, when I was told that Marvel was interested in me coming back, the editor called me up and said, would you be interested in doing Spider-Man again? I said, yes. And he said, okay, I know who you should work with because of what you've done in the past. The success of the series when we did it. He says, and I didn't have to ask for it. What do you think about working with Scott again? I said, of course, that would be wonderful. Zeb is going to be the writer, and you guys are going to do great. And it was as simple as that. In the past, I've never had the guts to say I demand working with Scott or Klaus or anybody else. I asked the editor, if there's somebody you have in mind that you think will work, tell me who it is. If not, there's these guys that I want to work with, that I've worked with and had success with in the past. And you tell me what you think. And that's all I can do. I can't even get myself to say that sometimes. I've never been able to do it. But great questions, thanks.
So you worked with a lot of different characters. John, is there any character or are there any characters that you would love to work on but you haven't had the chance? And are there any characters that you've worked on and thought it just wasn't the right fit?
The latter was, what the hell's the name of that character again? Starbrand? All right. But not because it was a bad, it wasn't that good a character.
There are some bad characters.
I was taking off
right.
X-Men for that.
Right, yeah, that was not.
But if I had a chance to work on a character that I haven't worked on as a monthly character, it would be Doctor Strange.
Oh, cool.
Just because I think it's got so many possibilities, and I would love to try it. That would be it.
Yeah, and I've worked on pretty much everything I could have dreamt of working on, so it's hard for me to even name a character I haven't done so far.
All right. Who else do we have?
Anybody else?
Right there.
Yeah. What was your initial thoughts when the switch from physical to digital art happened? What was your initial thoughts on that? Were you angry? Were you excited?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hammer and chisel on marble is still with me. I can't get it any other way. Pencil, eraser, and a ruler and a piece of paper. I can't change it. Now, doesn't mean I shouldn't think about it in the future. It's just that I like it this way. I have my success this way, and I'll stick with it. If I stop doing deadline work, I'm going to be a painter, and I can't wait for that day someday to happen.
Yeah, and
Great question.
I for years was being told, like, oh, Scott, inking's going to disappear. You got to learn how to do computer coloring or digital inking. And I realized it's like, I'm good at the traditional tools. I like the traditional tools, and I actually have original artwork to sell. So there's no real incentive for me to go digital. However, sometimes my editor will call me up and say, hey, we need the hair changed on this panel or something. And instead of taking white out or doing what we used to do, literal patches that we'd cut out and glue onto it, now I will usually do corrections if they're needed in the computer. So I'm not averse to using it as a tool, but I prefer to, we learned how to do this before we had computer art. So, and it may sound trite, but I think the soul of the artist is in there if you're touching it, if you're holding it, that connection we have with the traditional tools. To me, digital is cold, and the results can be gorgeous, but it's a remove, it's a coldness and I like to be connected to my work.
Good question. I had a funny conversation with another artist who said, why don't you go digital? I can work on a plane. So can I.
Yeah, exactly.
I got my little lap board and a pencil and an eraser.
Yep, and I've worked on planes as well. Yeah.
Now, do you ever have to worry about the batteries running low?
Only if I haven't slept in a couple of days.
Actually, one time I got hit by a hurricane, lost power for 10 days. I was still working by sunlight, you know? So, and actually at nighttime I had candles and stuff. I was still working because you're drawing with traditional old-fashioned tools. You don't need power.
That's the truth.
Who else has got one? Oh, right there.
So with newer artists and writers, has there ever been a time that you've had to basically talk someone out of imposter syndrome, or on the flip side, have you ever had to talk someone, say, check your ego at the door? And you don't have to name names, but it would be so much easier.
That's good. The only egos I've encountered were better artists to me, and I couldn't say an effing word. That's it. Editors have egos that we have to put up with.
Yeah, they pay the check, so we have no
That's the
control
truth.
over that. Yeah.
The truth of the matter is the great artists and the great writers have egos, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, if they weren't great, then they shouldn't have egos, or we would tell them, shut up, but you can't. I've never encountered somebody that's a lousy artist or a lousy writer that had a big ego. I haven't approached them or I haven't run into them. There are some of them, and unfortunately, I don't have to deal with them. I'm lucky.
Well, I've actually, because I frequently get to work with newcomers or relatively new pencilers, they're like, oh yeah, give that to Scott. Scott will help him out or let him grow or whatever. I like to show them their potential, essentially. And I've discovered over the decades that the artists that accept criticism generally thrive and do better. The artists that say, don't change a thing, don't change anything, I'm not gonna, and I'm like, I can make your work better. Like, don't touch a thing. It's like, what artist would say, I don't want to get better? Those are the ones with the egos, and they don't usually survive. So, especially the young ones,
said.
they don't survive.
Well said.
All right, what else do we have out there?
And to end that, before you go into this, the words from my father were, there's always somebody bigger, better, stronger, smarter, and a better artist. Better look, well, not better look. Sorry, I didn't mean. But he was right. And that's how you get better, is that there's always somebody you have to strive to get as good as.
Now, is it true that you were the only Marvel bullpen hunk of the month? Just throwing that out there.
You had to bring that up.
I had to.
It was a practical joke by Jim Shooter. It really was. I had nothing to do with
It
it.
was a practical joke, and he put it in his.
He even demanded that I give that stupid look. But I never got him back. I'll get him back. I'll get him somehow. I had a hand up in the back.
So I just want to say, your Daredevil was my first Daredevil. When I first
Thank you.
became a character, you were an innocent run on that, which in my opinion is still criminally overlooked. That is a-
Thank you.
I hear the great runs on
She
Daredevil,
was spectacular as a writer on that. She was great.
Yeah, I hear Frank Miller, and then they skip that.
That's a good point. It's a very good point.
Is there any chance you might ever go back to Daredevil?
Yes, there is a chance. Yes. I would love to do that character again. I have to ask Ann what she's doing.
I would actually love, I've never done John's Daredevil
Thank you.
outside of
Thank
like guest appearances or whatever. So I would love to do a run on Daredevil with John. I think that would be really
Ann
amazing.
and I knew each other as editor and artist when she was working in the X-Men office. And then she went over to the Daredevil side of it. And we hit it off spectacularly professionally. She played softball too. She was a great lady. Now, I don't know what she's doing right now, but if it gets to that point, I'm making that phone call because we had a great success. She allowed me to throw in plot ideas, and it was the best thing because she just opened up a whole new avenue for me. The editor said it too, Ralph Macchio. You do whatever you want, throw it in, if she likes it, we'll put it in. I came up with a one-act play idea called Beer with God. Down on his luck, guy sits in a bar, and God comes in and sits down next to him, and they have a conversation, and so on. And at the time, we were working with Daredevil and Mephisto because of the devil part of it, etc. And when I told Ann I had this idea, she says, make it Beer with the Devil, and we'll have Mephisto come in. And it was perfect. Mephisto comes and sits down next to Matt Murdock as a beautiful woman, and he kisses Mephisto at a bar. This is genius. So that's the kind of camaraderie we had as a writer and artist. And you're right, she doesn't get the credit she deserves. That run was as good as any run on any book I worked on. I agree with you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, what else do we have out there? Oh, way in the back.
I'll echo his sentiments with Punisher Warzone. Do you have any plans in the future, maybe getting back to that character at all?
I had no plans, but every time I sign a Punisher book, I love it. I love doing it. He looked like every one of my relatives. I'm sorry. Here's a funny story. My buddy Tony Sirico, who was model-esque good looks when we were younger, had a straight nose when I first met him. By the time we were out of college, his nose had about 9 different directions to it, just because he was in fights all the time. And the same thing happened with the Punisher. The Punisher had a perfectly straight Superman nose. It was stupid. He had no superpowers. He got hit 1,000,000 times. Should have a... So I beat him up once, and the writer said, don't do it that badly. I said, no, he's got to be. I've seen bar fights. I know what this looks like. Now, the funny part is, he kept the broken nose and the eyebrows. And I'll never forget John Buscema, when he worked on The Punisher after I did, he said, who is this based on? I said, it looks like Tony Sirico or Conan.
Conan, yeah.
And he said, are you kidding me? He said, yeah, you beat up Conan all the time. It just had to look like a real person to me. And that's one of the things I loved about The Punisher is he no longer had a straight, perfect nose. And that was fun. He looked like a regular guy that got beat up regularly, that's all. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, now I want to work on The Punisher.
And Daredevil, yeah. And Dr.
But
Strange.
don't tell Tony Sirico I said that.
Now that I think about it, nobody draws a broken nose better than
There you go.
He looks in the mirror all the time. Sorry.
One question I wanted to ask you was, how has your approach to just drawing, when I look at your Punisher, I look at your Matt Murdock, they're big, burly dudes. And then your Spider-Man is more, his body is almost like it looks like a carpenter's body. It's really, but it's thinner. How do you sort of make those decisions when you transition to Spider-Man? That kind of almost freaked me out because I was used to Daredevil and he's this big, bulky wrestler.
Now, the funny part about that, Daredevil was not supposed to be bulky. And I may have made him bulky just out of sheer the way the industry was going, big muscular guys, everybody was, and big voluptuous females because everybody was. But Romita Sr., when he was doing the both of them, said Daredevil is balletic compared to the awkward Spider-Man, who is a awkward spider.
Right.
And Spider-Man
more
is
angular, more.
yeah, exactly. Now, Daredevil was never supposed to be gigantically bulky, and neither is Spider-Man. And you can't help yourself sometimes. But I've learned that the characters specifically has a personality that may be a physical personality. The Hulk is gigantic, those kind of things. But Spider-Man should never have been bulky. And Daredevil, and that was maybe my mistake. I got told that Spider-Man's legs were too skinny by a couple of people. He was.
But there was even a time though, at one point in our early run when I started working with you, they said we were making him too big and we had to thin him down.
See?
So
There it is.
different editors give you different advice, different time periods, styles. So.
But there should be
It's- yeah.
specifics to the characters, you're right.
Right.
I remember my father saying, well, let's see, Captain America should be 6'4", 250, that kind of thing. The Punisher should be 6'6", 275. It's a wrestler type of mentality. Watch the WWE, whatever it is. These people are gigantic people.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing. Some of them are leaner, some of them are not. You have to do the same thing with the personality of the superhero. It's not always a success, and we've learned our lessons. I've done it wrong. I've done some characters too bulky. But and he'll say to me, those legs are too thick. I think I should make them a little bit leaner. All right.
For the record, I wasn't criticizing. I thought.
No. I love criticism. I love it. As a matter of fact, I had some guy at a convention telling me Spider-Man's ankles were too skinny. True story. I went back, and the guy was right. I went back, and I didn't let it happen again. And I never heard it from the guy again. Maybe he's going to sue me for something. I don't know. But if you listen, there we go. Here's a great segue into constructive criticism. If you, like he said when that artist said, don't tell me anything. If somebody says something, go back and look at it. If they're right,
be
they're
honest,
right.
yeah.
If they're wrong, don't say another word. Just ignore
Right.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I like to take criticism, constructive. This woman knows things about me. When she sees the artwork, she'll say to me gently, this is stupid, fix it. Not exactly, but she sees things that I've done and knows what I can do. This is off a little bit, and she's been right more than she's been wrong, and that's what you have to listen.
Yeah.
And other editors, other writers, other artists, if they say something, listen to them first before you tell them they're wrong.
My wife is also an artist. She does a different kind of art, but definitely has an artist's eye. And she'll come in and critique me. I'm like, go away, But she's always right. She's always right. But it gives you that other perspective to step back a little bit, look at it, and say, damn, she's right.
And I'll give you an
She got
example.
it, she got it right.
As soon as I finish a book or a set of pages, I put it down. I've made photocopies. I don't look at it. I go to bed, go to sleep, whatever I can. I go the next day, I look at it, and holy shit, there's something wrong with that figure, and I will fix something. She will do. That's why this helps me out. It's a fresh look, a fresh set of
Yeah,
eyes.
exactly.
And again, if my father doesn't have an ego about things like that, because Virginia had a habit of saying the exact same thing to him, only not as pleasant as hers. If he has no ego, I shouldn't have an ego, and that's how you learn to get better.
So if I just, a quick follow-up on that. How do you kind of plan your month out so you can get the pages done and then still have enough time to sleep?
Sleeping's overrated.
yeah.
And then
right.
look at the pages with a fresh eye and make the corrections before you send them in.
Before you send them out to Scott, I have to look at the photocopies the next day after a fresh eye or 2 or 3 hours sleep. You got it. You gotta take a
And
look at it.
sometimes he'll actually call me up or send me a note after he's already mailed stuff out and say, oh, wait, I got it, and because we communicate, it's easy for me to just adjust and we're talking about minimal, I mean, minor things like, oh, I just moved that line a fraction of an inch and now that thigh is a little bit different, you know. But he's got that eye, so he pays attention. And if you have to mail it out to Scott immediately, you catch it the next day, and I haven't gotten to those pages yet. It works
Deadlines will
fine,
cause
you know.
sometimes forget that you have to look at something again. I have to be my own editor. You have to.
You can't you have to be your own harshest critic. That's how it works.
And
That's how we survive.
Sleeping's overrated. If I ever decide to die, then I'll sleep.
Yeah, and speaking of which, I actually have a plane to catch, so I got to head out in a minute. So can we at least my part wrap up? Anybody have any last questions for me? Yeah.
I'm curious about something that maybe you feel like something gained and something lost by the way that technology is progressing with making. So like in the last 5 years at least, you're seeing a lot more halftones, gradations.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, in digital inking, or even I'm thinking about like some of the work that like Adam Hubert's been doing lately with a lot of like the kind of cross-hatching brushes and things where, so I'm curious, do you think that there's something like really positive or good about being able to do those things, or do you think that there's something that we're losing?
Well, the funny thing, the halftones, for instance, I'm a painter. I love doing halftones and stuff. But to me, it's literally a waste of time because the colorist is already doing that. So why am I treading on their toes and saying, oh, I'm making those decisions for you. If I trust you, if I know you're a good artist, I don't need to do that. So yeah, the digital black and white version looks really cool and neat, but when you get to color, I've had countless times where my gray tones have gone. They're just disappeared. And to me, when I see like, yeah, those crosshatch brushes look really cool, but then I'm a trained artist, but even untrained artists are like, wait, I've seen this exact same pattern page after page after page, and it's no longer special. It becomes a routine. And one of the biggest problems with digital art is I see people just blowing up a face or shrinking down a face. Like, I saw that exact face 3 pages ago, and you just copied and pasted. Yeah, it's a difference. Or oh wow, I flopped it. You know, it's like no. There's one of the things I love about working with John is the script will say repeat panel, exactly the same panel as the panel before. He will redraw it, and I will re-ink it. I will not copy the previous inking. I will re-ink, and he will redraw. And even if there's minor thing. A millisecond just passed, and we drew it that way, you know? And that's, I think there's amazing digital capabilities, but it can make artists lazy very easily. And that laziness, I think, shows up on the page, and I don't want to hurt the fans that way. I don't want to take it away from you guys of cheating you. And yeah, we have to work fast, we have to work hard, but we try to really tell the story.
All right, so
The young man actually had another question too.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
So, at the very beginning, we talked about comics to movies. I kind of want to ask about the opposite of that. What are some comic book movies that, movie-based comic books that you thought were good or bad? Mainly, I'm talking about Ash Williams because that is one of my favorite characters of all time.
It's you, man.
That's a hard question to answer.
That's why I want you to answer it.
I mean, it's actually cool for me. I've actually worked on a lot of movie adaptations, for instance, and that's always a challenge. Half the time we have to do the comic book version before the movie's actually out, so I haven't seen the movie yet, which makes it really tricky. So like when Mark Bagley and I did the Hulk movie adaptation, we knew Nick Nolte was in there, so we drew him clean shaven, but in the movie he was bearded. They never told us that, you know. But they're literally two vastly different medias, and it's really hard to translate that. You know, Kick-Ass is a great comic book. It's also a really cool movie series, but they're not the same thing. So it's really hard to equal, and John and I are both major movie fans. We learn a ton. I look at lighting, I look at camera angles, I look at editing when I'm, trying to do artwork. And I learned a lot of that from other visual storytellers like movie makers, commercial makers, all that, music videos, all that stuff applies to our job. So I'm always constantly learning from that stuff. But the adaptation from one to the other is always tricky. I've never done what I consider a completely successful comic adaptation of a movie or a completely successful movie adaptation of a comic. They come close, and sometimes really close, and sometimes one just like a lot of the modern movies, I'm like, yeah, they're basing it on stuff I did in the comics, but they had to change it to update the time, the technology, whatever, and sometimes they actually make it better. It's like, wow, we didn't think of that. That's cool. That's a neat twist,
The only thing I came close to is a movie adaptation was doing the work with the Kiss, when I did the Kiss adaptation. Gene Simmons was a good guy, but I never did a film adaptation except working with Kiss on their book when they put their blood into the ink and all that stuff.
Okay, yeah.
Well-
Unfortunately, I got to head out because I got a flight to catch. So
Okay, we do, I was just told,
See you in Canada. All right.
Scott Hanna, everyone. Have a good flight. I was told we have only about 5 minutes left, so if you want to answer one more question, I guess we can do that.
Sure. Actually, these two, three questions. Okay. Yes, first with this gentleman.
Well, I was hoping to get it from both of you. I know I don't have that luxury now, but as artists, you're always growing, right? And you're so good at whatever you do, but I was curious, what do you see as a challenge for yourself?
A challenge for myself to do something I haven't done before, to do it better than I did it the first time, just do something I haven't done. And with having done Spider-Man for so many years, it's really, we said it before, it's almost impossible to do something that's not derivative of what I've done or somebody else has done. It's tough, but at least it's preeminent. It's right there. I have to do something different. I have to do a figure that I haven't done before, an angle I haven't done before. Sometimes the story dictates that I do something I've done before. It's hard to describe that difficulty, but it's in my mind. That's a great question. That's a great question.
Okay, and you had,
Yeah, it's kind of a two-part. What was the first comic book you ever worked on, and what was the first one that made you want to do it for a living?
First one I ever worked on was a 6-page abortion called Chaos at the Coffee Bean. I was awful, and I don't know why they gave me more work after that, but that was the first thing I did that was printed. And I think that's the first. I don't think anything was ever done story-wise, but the second half was, what was?
The one that made you decide.
The one that made me decide to be an artist was watching my father draw that Daredevil cover when I was just a little guy. That when he told me that this is a superhero, because he had been doing romance comics before that. Only romance, and my brother and I couldn't give a damn. But every time the monsters came out under my bed, I went upstairs into the attic and cried at his feet until he showed me that Daredevil cover that he was working on. And he described what a superhero was, and these are the bad guys, and this little guy in the middle, surrounded by these bad guys with the guns, he's gonna beat them all up. He's gonna save the day, with the help from this guy up in the tree, the blonde Tarzan guy. Oh, and by the way, the superhero is blind. What? And I was hooked. I even went, and meanwhile, the romance comics were everywhere in the house, but I never looked at other comics because I thought everything was romance. Even with the Superman comics at the barbershop, they were on the floor, they were all over, like Batman and Superman. I never paid attention to it. I thought it was all romance stuff. And finally, I got hooked, and that was the one, that was the moment, and my father gave me that cover. I still have that cover.
Never gone.
Well, you never know.
well,
That's
I've
the
been,
most important part of that's the one that did it to me.
I've been told that we have run out of time.
Oh.
Want to thank the great John Romita Jr. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.